Hello, this is Alicia with Perform Mentor for another Heuristic podcast. Today, I am here with Amanda Barnett, and
Hello.
She's the Director of Employee Growth and Engagement at Go-Forth Pest Control. Thank you, Amanda, for joining us. Is there anything that more that you'd like to say about yourself, maybe to share with folks that don't know you?
Yeah, I think I'll start by just saying I do have some ties to Perform Mentor and just maybe how I met you, Alicia. And I want to say about 4 years ago now, which is crazy to think about how time flies. But I went back to school. And if for those who are listening that know me, I love learning. And I've gone back to school, I want to say 3 or 4 times in my life. But with that being said, I basically met Alicia as I was apply for HR jobs. And when I told Alicia about my background and I said, I have a background in behavior analysis and why people do what they do, but really I am very interested in how, we can work on something as abstract as soft skills, but make it so that way we can measure it, we can take data on it, and we can replicate it, and we can really just take a look at a more data-driven approach. And to a certain extent, that's what behavior analysis is at the core, doing meaningful work that, really is, how do I say this? Something that can be repeated, more or less. And so when I was telling Alicia, I was like, oh, HR folks just aren't looking at me. I don't understand why. I feel like the things I know can be very valuable. And she was like, absolutely. Well, come join my team at Perform Mentor. And at the time, Alicia's team was her and one other person. Her name is Vicky. She's fantastic. And at the time, I was like, heck yeah, why not? So over the time, worked with Alicia for about 3.5 years before I got hired into Go-Forth, which was a client for Perform Mentor. And they were just really happy with the work I was doing. And they found out that I might be interested in working for them. And so then they made me an offer, and I still have this great relationship with Alicia and Perform Mentor. And what I can say is I just absolutely, for those of you who don't know Alicia or you're listening in, she's a fantastic mentor and just such a great person to know. So I highly recommend reaching out.
It made you an offer you couldn't refuse. So
yeah, it was pretty great. I really love it. And it was all about building good culture and a positive workplace and increasing engagement. And they think very much in alignment like I do of let's try to use data-driven decisions, but also make it in a way that we can think about our values and our core values and just all kinds of things. So I was just really excited about the projects, and Chase is amazing to work for. And just such a great team. Is very collaborative over there. I feel very, very lucky.
Yeah, well, I mean, pest control is a service, is business, and what is a services? You're not going to have success as a services business if your people, aren't high performing, if they don't understand, what they need to do, etc. So that's, I don't know, it seems obvious to both you and I that your background and experience is really, really relevant. So I think that you're doing dynamite work, and and Go-Forth as an organization is really on the leading edge of these sorts of things. And bravo to both you and Chase, the CEO. Which brings us to our heuristic. And but before we talk about what is a heuristic, we were talking about this before we hit record. I have a bad habit of using $20 words. Heuristic is one of them. All that means, it's like a little rule of thumb, a little simplified way of making decisions in complex changing environments. Is probably going to be more right than wrong. But it's not like a perfect analysis. So that's what this is. We have just a bunch of heuristics. So I don't know, any thoughts on heuristics other than how to pronounce it?
Well, when I think about general rule of thumb, I really, and we were even talking about this on the call today, just when we think about decision-making framework and how we problem solve, and even difficult problems, how do we teach and enable others to, take something that is very complex and break it down into simple steps that are actionable and we can follow up on. And so one thing that I'm not sure we're going to talk about today, but is anything that you want people to follow up on, it has to be, we really have to think through what is going to be something that is, and starting where it's going to be the easiest for that person, that's going to have the greatest impact, and then working from there, or low hanging fruit, as you like to call it, Alicia. But so when I think about rule of thumb, I really just and this is a two-parter, but I started thinking about like what does it actually look like in action, and why I deviated. But also just $20 words in general is I always have to do this because I have a tendency to just throw out words and people are like, what do you mean? And then just circling back and making sure that I have clear understanding and checking for understanding with the people I'm talking with, and that if I talk and use words that they might not feel comfortable asking, I might say, hey, out of what I said, what are your takeaways, or just trying to get the conversation aligned, so that way I know they're essentially getting what I'm putting down. Because if I use like really big technical terms, more than likely, it's not going to work out very well for me. And I've had that experience.
Yeah. Well, you know what? This is just we did not plan this, keep in mind, but this is the perfect segue into our heuristic, which is, let's see, I write it down. Work hard to make hard things more simple. Whether the hard thing is a complicated word or something else, if we make an effort on a regular basis, and what I find is to, make things as simple as you can without making them simplistic, but no more complex than they need to be. That's a really good thing, especially when you're working in a smaller business or a smaller organization where things are changing and you really need to be flexible. So I guess what is your initial reaction to that heuristic?
It makes me think of our core value at Go-Forth, Fight for Simplicity, and what that looks like in action. So I have an example just recently, actually this past week, where I was talking with Chase, and we had a gray area that came out, and people love black and white because it's simple, you can implement it, you know what to do. But when it's gray, they're like, oh, what do I do with this? And for a little bit of context, we had somebody that had very unfortunate circumstances, personal crises that are kind of happening, and they aren't on FMLA. They haven't been with the company for a year. We want to honor them. We want to make sure that we're supporting them. So we've had a lot of conversations. Also, on the flip side too, this person has a role for a reason, and to a certain extent, we want to make sure that our support doesn't also have undue harm on the business long term. So with that being said, the Performenter team actually helped me out quite a bit. So I have some mentors there as well, besides Alicia. I like to collect them, but they gave me some great feedback. So when I think about Fight for Simplicity, we really broke down what was a problem statement. And it turns out we sometimes will even start with an incorrect problem. And so we really have to drill down. And I think we use this term that I really like, is seek to understand. And looking at making sure we're diagnosing properly. And so the question first came out as, hey, if we fill out FMLA paperwork for somebody that's on FMLA, can we start the clock? And I was like, no, please don't do that. And it turns out the problem statement was a little different, and that how do we help support this person and, aim for delight and let this person know that they're a valued team member, but not do it at the cost of the business as well. And how do we walk that line? So what we ended up doing is, and with the help of Jim and Lois at Performenter, they were amazing. We essentially wrote out a letter informing the person of the things that we can do to help support them. And in this case, it was working from home, allowing them to maybe decrease their hours a little bit and work part-time because they needed to be pulled away. Continue to have discussions around when they do need to take leave, that they can take it. And then the last one, that we really talked about was to let this person know that they actually aren't protected under FMLA, that sometimes people might not understand that, and they need to know that they're not protected under FMLA, put it in writing, let them know how we're going to support them. But then also, if they're, let's say, decreasing their hours, how does that affect their benefits? So we really walk through, in this case, how would it look with affecting their medical benefits, their enrollment. If somebody were maybe here for a year longer, like how would it affect their PTO and their PTO accrual? Because at Go-Forth, we do have a little bit of a wait before you can sign up for PTO. That's why I said a year. But anyways, that stuff aside, they really, Lois and Jim really helped walk me through. We got to talk about benefits and letting that person know the decision that they're making, and so they can make an informed decision. And that we also put it in writing, so we have our ducks in a row, and we can show that if somebody were to have other circumstances, we can show this is the model, or this is a framework that we make decisions with. And that way we can, again, fight for simplicity. It's a one-page letter, but it really lays out like how we can support that person, but also in a way that lets them make informed decisions, that also lets them, in a way, like be able to have a really good discussion with their manager about what it takes to, really support them, and what the business needs to. So I thought it was great. And Chase really said that was fight for simplicity. And we had to spend a couple hours on this. So when I say work hard, I mean, maybe this is like a little bit, there's definitely more complex problems out there. But when I think about work hard, it wasn't the simple solution of like, hey, let's pull FMLA and have them fill it out. Well, that didn't quite make sense in this case. So let's spend a couple hours, let's make sure we get it right, and then spend additional like hour maybe talking to this person to check in. We've been doing that anyways, talk to them, and then let them know that we're going to put this in writing so we can mail it to them. Essentially I was able to talk to other managers about how we handled this. What I can say is we have an unfortunate number of people that are dealing with very, very difficult issues, from deaths in the family to just losing babies at like 19 weeks, like just awful things. And so when I think about how do we support them, we want to be able to do that, but this is a framework on how. So again, we're making it simple in the long term, something that we can do and be consistent, but then and all the managers were like behind it. They're like, yes, this is what we need. So hopefully that's a good example. That's something that just happened like a day or two ago. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a great example that really gives a concrete sense of how this makes an impact for people, for both the leaders and people that are maybe on the receiving end of decisions. So that, like, first of all, just simple means making sure that you're solving the right problem, or you're clear on what it is that you're truly solving, because it's so easy. This goes back to an earlier conversation that you and I were having. It's like, if you're, it might seem really simple to just slap a Band-Aid on a bigger issue, but then if it keeps recurring, then you haven't really solved the issue. And so so it's hard work to figure out what the real issue is.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And sometimes people think they know, but when they reflect on it, they're like, oh no, that's actually not the issue. It's something else. And sometimes it comes out by asking really good, thoughtful questions too. And that's something that I think you've taught me as well, is, let's think about, we might, instead of just telling them, well, they're not really active in that process. So let's think about how do we walk them through, even just how they analyze their own issue, so that way they can get better at it in the future.
Let me share another story that
I love
really epitomizes, like this issue. And it came up in our call earlier. Is an organization has a fleet of vehicles, and they have to get the bumpers repaired from time to time. It happens, and come to find out that paint was peeling and flaking off of the bumpers. Now, I don't know about you, but I've been alive for a while, and I have never seen that like on a vehicle that's not like ancient. So what they were doing was, I guess, the simplistic quick approach was to just slap some more paint over it until it starts to peel again, and then you send it back to the shops and do the same thing. But if you notice that there's a pattern of this sort of thing over the longer run, the simplest thing to fight for simplicity, which is the core value of the organization, or maybe a little bit harder work, is to figure out what's the underlying problem. And if we solve the underlying problem, things get simpler. Ta-da!
Mhm. Yeah, it's true.
But anyway, let me give the punchline because this is kind of funny. So it turned out that the shop had ordered some bumpers of the right style but the wrong color, and the way that they solved the problem was just to paint over it and install it on the vehicle and not tell anyone about it. So,
And then just have it peel off every 6 months, you know? Then we'll just, no, you know what? We'll spray paint it over again.
don't do that.
Oh
do
man,
that.
that's funny. I do have another example actually related, and it's around our rain jackets and rain gear. When I first came in, I heard that our rain jackets were like ShamWows. You're standing out in the rain, and then they just absorb all of it. And I was like, oh no, that sounds awful. Turns out it kind of is. And what they found out was when they ordered these jackets, it didn't really take data on what the jackets really were. I apologize. My Slack is blowing up all of a sudden. But with that being said, when I started asking Chase about it, he was like, well, we order them. They're most expensive jackets out there. What do you mean that they're leaking? There's no way. Turns out that they were, and that after you wear a backpack blower a couple times, it wore away at the seams, and then it just got in where the seams were. And so they didn't really do product testing. And I was like, aha, there we go. So what we ended up doing was, trying to test out some jackets. And then this is actually a little bit of a compounded thing. So we ended up ordering more jackets so we can test them out and figure out, okay, which ones over time will perform better and make sure that they're not turning into ShamWows. And that because nobody at that point even used them, and they're like, $150 per person, so we're wasting all this company money on things that people aren't even going to use. And what the solution was at the time was to take, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's like this spray that you spray jackets with, and then it makes them waterproof for only like a brief period of time, only for like maybe a week. So they were like, oh yeah, let's just get more spray. We'll fix it. Well, that'll be good. But it reminds me of the bumper situation. Like, oh, just spray the bumper. Oh, let's just spray the rain jacket. That's good. And we're like, we're spending $150 for this jacket. That sucks at the beginning, and we keep ordering more. Like, that's not great.
This is not working out.
It's not working out. So we ended up, the long-term solution ended up being working hard. Like, we have to product test, and we have to take data to make sure it's, like what we're going to be asking people to do is the product is going to meet up to that measure. And we ended up having that discussion this morning. So we actually know what jackets we want to use, and it'll just make things more simple. And it turns out that we're going to save the company money. It wasn't about that to begin with, but it's going to be a product that people actually like and that they're going to wear. And we had some discussions around it, and people feel supported. So I think that's just another really good example of, it's totally worth it. Because at that point, the spray didn't really fix the root cause to a certain extent. It just kind of kept the problem going.
It's a temporary, like pseudo fix, I guess you could say. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was about to come up with say another big word, so when you $20 word, so I'm not going to do that. Working on it. Well, these are all great examples. Well, is there anything else, before we wrap up, that you, like, I don't know, like how does, is this heuristic something that came easy for you, or is coming easy for you, or has it been a surprise, or kind of?
I'm going to say no, only because when I think about a solution, I have a tendency, even though I don't write it down, it's usually in my head, I start thinking about all the complexities or all the things that we need to consider. And so I start trying to account for those. So when I think about, I'll use a career path. So we carved out a career path at Go-Forth. And I started thinking about, like, well, how are we going to measure people's performance, and how are we going to know they mastered that skill, and how are we going to provide feedback, and how are we going to measure progress on their growth assignments? So it spirals into this crazy thing. And I was like, we need to have a form for the managers to measure their progress for when they have their one-on-ones, because otherwise, how are they going to know like they could never figure it out themselves. But I was like, how would they ever know to move somebody on? And, and so I just spiraled into this like crazy thing. And funny thing is, the managers got together, and I spent, I want to say, like a week coming up with this form of feedback loops and like measuring, and like it was like mastery criteria, like how do you know if somebody mastered it, so that way they know to move on. Anyways, it was this like brainchild of chaos. And so the managers got together and were like, hey, you know what, we got together and we got a way to track it, and we did it in 5 minutes. And I was like, oh, in my head I'm like, this is going to be terrible. And so then, and I was like, oh, that's cool. I was like, why don't you show me? I would love to see what you guys did. Cause I was genuinely interested, expecting like hot garbage. Turns out what they created was amazing. And all they did was take the career path, had the like metric, or how do I say it, performance expectations for that role. And then they just had added another column, and then for comments and like maybe data. And then they just said, measures. That's it. Just measures, and then they can have a conversation on their one-on-one about it. And I was like, you know what? That's good, because in our criteria, we get a little specific on certain things. Like, you would have 4 to 5 star reviews for your customers, and you would send maybe 1 review per day, because that's actually in your control. So you would want to work on those leading indicators. But with that being said, that's what they did. And I was like, you know what? That's simple. And that is, you guys will follow through on that hands down, more so than this crazy monster that I created for, you guys. And they're like, they took one look at it and they're like, ew, like, we don't even want to look at it. Like, please don't. So I think that's a good, I think that's a really good example of that even I have to really think about and be intentional about what is going to be easiest for that person to start with, that is in their current skill set, and grow from there. And if I start with that and I really break it down, I can do a better job of trying to make things that are seemingly simple, but there's so much work that goes behind it. Honestly, like, even simple designs, I think, even just when I think about marketing, something that's a simple design probably had a ton of work behind it to be simple. So it's
well, finding that smallest thing that can make the biggest impact. And
exactly it.
And I think the beautiful thing about the managers, like, for them it's going to be a little easier because they're the ones that would have to use it, so they're filtering immediately on what's practical for me. That helps me, like, and you're like, what is the most rigorous scientific thing?
I know, right? Oh my God.
The difference from being in academia and being a practitioner, and I think it's really wonderful to have that background, and it's also wonderful to be a practitioner as well. So having both those things. But well, Amanda, thank you so much for your time and these wonderful examples. These things come to life with examples. Otherwise, it just sounds like just a bunch of abstract words strung together that don't mean anything. So thank you for sharing all of these things. Yay. And I'm about to stop us recording. Don't go anywhere.